Well, hello, welcome.
Meeting
Good
rooms
morning,
will never
good
die.
afternoon.
They're the places that bring people together, where the truly unique ideas are born. But does the traditional meeting room satisfy the needs of the future? It's expensive, fixed, and full of materials which are impossible to recycle. We are living out one giant workplace experiment. Leases are getting shorter, spaces are changing faster. So we need furniture that's movable, reconfigurable, and scalable. The meeting room has been one of the few exceptions until now. Meet verandas, the meeting rooms you never throw away. We have created an engineered room system that is inherently sustainable, incorporates massive design choice, and is built for the future. Its modular design means any room variant can be disassembled and its component parts reused to create an entirely different structure. The durability of the system means this process can be endlessly repeated, eliminating waste. Here, we have a flexible, sustainable framework able to adapt to the evolving needs of the workplace in a circular fashion. Verandas, the meeting room choice if you care about the future. Arrive, thrive, and leave without a trace.
Well, hello, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from, and welcome to this Insights Live conversation with Space Store. I'm Alex Harvey, and I'm co-moderating the discussion today. But before we just dive into the discussion, I wanted to give you a quick introduction to the topic and a quick introduction to our great panelists we have with us today. So you can see the title on the slide in front of you, Made to Bleisure. What do the blurring of lines between workplace and hospitality mean for the office? And we're going to deep dive into the topic with some great help and insights from our three panelists. Of course, as we go through today's conversation, whether you're joining us on Zoom, on the Zoom platform, or whether you're joining us via the live stream on LinkedIn, feel free to dive in with your questions, your thoughts, your insights, maybe the challenges and experiences that you can share. We'd love to hear from you in either the Q&A box on Zoom or the chat box on the LinkedIn Live. But we've got a great panel with us today to dive into this topic, and perhaps we'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, give a bit of background and context to their work experience and the insights that they bring to today's discussion. Tracy, could we start with you? Perhaps you could give yourself a quick intro and a bio of your background.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Tracy Martinez. I'm with Nokia, based in Dallas, Texas, and I'm the Workplace Design Manager for the Americas region. I oversee all of our interior design, space planning, change management, and branding in all of our projects here. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy, and thanks for joining us today. Excited to hear your views and insights. Colin, perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Colin Bury with Gensler London, where I've been for the last 5 years. And prior to that, 25 years in San Francisco, where I had a front row seat to the innovation economy and all the wonderful things that happened there that gave us all the wonderful apps and phones and, crazy technologies that sort of drive the world today. But I primarily focus on workplace, but I've done, everything from an airport to product design. So happy to be here. Thanks, Alex.
Great. Thanks, Colin. And likewise, very excited to have you on board and to hear some of the insights you can bring for your many years of experience in workplace design and in design generally.
Are you saying I'm old? Is that?
I was not saying that at all, no.
I'm kidding.
Good, thanks, Colin. Looks so, just looking at the Q&A, we've already got one fan of Tracy in the chat. So next we'll move to Christine. Perhaps you can introduce yourself, and thanks for joining us.
Morning, I'm Christine Nguyen, Director of Real Estate with ServiceTitan. We are a home and commercial software for the trades, based in LA. And I lead up the real estate team for ServiceTitan, everything from leases, construction, build outs, operating, basically anything pertaining to their real estate facility side.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Christine, and looking forward to hearing your experiences and views as well. And then from the Spacestore side, Tiff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course, thanks, Alex. So I'm Tiffany. I work in the marketing team here at Space Store, very much focusing on producing content and insights for our clients, as well as producing exceptional experiences across our showrooms across the world and our events.
Great, thanks, Tiff, and thanks for joining us. And just to remind you, I'm Alex Harvey, co-moderating the discussion today with Tiff. My role at Space Store is working with some of our global clients, particularly some of the corporate organizations that we work with across multiple regions, and really excited to join this conversation to hear your views, hear your thoughts and your questions around the whole topic of bleisure, made to bleisure, the blurring of lines between hospitality and workplace, and what that means for office design, office utilization. Perhaps before we kind of really dive in, I think perhaps it'd be great to just get a bit of a view from our panel around what does bleisure mean? What we've seen this kind of smushing of words together happening a lot. Is bleisure a thing? What does it mean to you? Colin, perhaps you could give us your thoughts to kick off.
Well, I guess to me, it's sort of, I mean, it's interesting because it sort of encapsulates a lot of different things. I think last week I read something that called it workspitality, which kind of made me cringe. But and then the other one that used to be used a couple of years ago was resi-commercial. But I think what it's trying to capture is sort of this moment that we're in where the boundaries between, especially from a design standpoint, where the boundaries between hospitality and workplace have really, really blurred, right? Which is sort of the search for something other than what it's been. And I think as we kind of go through the conversation, we'll start to unpack what that means further.
Great, thanks, Colin. Tracy, go ahead.
Sure. I think for us and looking at this in our workplace, it's really about bringing those different types of spaces. So the spaces that, we've always had for the business side and maybe the heads down focus, but now it's really looking at those social areas, those collaborative areas, those wellness, fitness areas, and really bringing different experiences for our employees. So they really have a choice of what they want to work in today, or if they need some downtime, they have a place to go and do that. And so it's also kind of what's in our building, but also around our building that maybe can help support those activities as well, which just makes our overall workplace more inclusive for everyone.
That's great. And I think that's a point we can come back to, not just what's inside the building, but maybe the neighborhood, what's around the building as well. We can perhaps come back to that in a minute or two. Go ahead, Christine, give us your definition or your viewpoint around bleisure and what it really means.
I think it's a balance between people's personal life and their work life. And I think due to the pandemic, it's kind of come to the forefront of people needing to figure out how to balance that a little bit better. And I think people prioritizing that a little bit more, their work-life balance. I think we've always talked about it in the past, but I think we really had to live it during the pandemic. And so it's really, how do we integrate the different ways that people have adapted to working over the past couple of years, working from home, working in coffee shops, working in different types of places, and how do we bring that now to an office space and really, hone in on that for people. So
that's great. And just kind of gathering together the thoughts you've all shared, which I think brings some interesting additional viewpoints and questions. But I guess in my mind, I'm thinking there's kind of two different aspects that I hear being talked about around this whole bleisure. Workspitality, was it the word you used, Colin?
Again, that's not my word. It makes me cringe when I hear it, but yeah, bleisure sounds a little bit better than workspitality.
Okay,
but yeah,
we'll move on. We're not going to use that word. I guess that what I'm wondering is there's probably the aesthetic element, and that might be the more superficial aspect that people may view as this kind of hospitality influence we see coming into workplace. The other side of me says, well, great design is probably always going to be a bit of an evolution and a melting pot of different influences from nature, from different maybe parallel built environments. There's always going to be that element of a kind of organic development and evolution of workspace design from multiple influences. And then the flip side of that, and I would see this as the kind of deeper, probably more challenging one to get right, is the hospitality viewpoint around treating employees like customers and taking that whole kind of viewpoint from hospitality of, how can we give people experiences they want to come back to? So coming to the office isn't just a you know, a 9 till 5 because I've got a job to do. There's actually a reason to come, and there's a kind of magnetic attraction because of those experiences. Be interested, you know, Colin, from your viewpoint as a leader in the design sphere, kind of, you've probably seen both, but any commentary on either of those sides?
Yeah, so I think, you know, maybe just to give it, you know, I thought it'd be kind of interesting just to sort of, you know, especially coming from San Francisco, where you know, depending on the wind blows or whatever, you really feel it, you know, and to maybe go into a little bit of the history, sort of how we got here, right? So it seems like out of every recession, you know, or downturn, you know, whether it be the dot-com boom, et cetera, you know, the dot-com boom gave rise to Google and Facebook, who were trying to kind of make a mark for the type of space that they wanted to provide to attract people, right? And it was very sort of, you know, sort of almost punk. It was googly, right? Facebook wanted to look unfinished, you know, because the business wasn't finished. And, you know, and, you know, even at that time, you know, they were competing for the best and brightest talent to try to get them from Wall Street or whatever, they've got Ivy, you know, they were trying to compete for the Ivy League students that were graduating from university. Instead of them going to New York or to London or whatever, they were hoping to get them to, you know, to Silicon Valley or Dallas or wherever, you know, or Los Angeles or wherever it was in the world. You know, and part of that was space, right? And the space started to look much more casual and much more interesting, and the work model changed, right? Fast forward, the financial crash of 2008, we have the rise of Airbnb and Uber. And the space, it was really interesting because like the founders of those companies were also very, very design savvy, right? And they put a lot of emphasis on the space being a reflection of who they were. You know, for example, at Airbnb, you know, we actually did some of the listings as their meeting rooms and other types of functions, right? And so it was like they wanted, you know, potential new hires to come in and really understand the mission of the organization, but they also sort of almost wore their values on their sleeve. And so, you know, with the rise of diversity and inclusion, and we started to see this major blurring of the lines between, it actually started before that, and really of, you know, work and life. It was a lot of discussion about work-life balance, but you know, really about sort of bringing your whole self to work, right? And, you know, I think that a lot of the other sectors were not quite there. So fast forward to the pandemic, what ended up happening was the pandemic, I think, sort of supercharged, you know, sort of the movement that, you know, financial services, banking, you know, legal, et cetera, were now having to play catch up again to sort of attract the best and brightest away from, you know, these companies that were offering amazing stock options and these amazing spaces with lots of amenities and the other kinds of things, right? You know, so that it sort of put that all, you know, kind of put that movement in the model sort of on fast track, right? And then, you know, I think during the pandemic, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we could walk, you know, we could work in shorts, you know, or at least, you know, from the waist down, we could be in shorts or pajama bottoms or whatever it was that we wanted to be working in, right? And be completely comfortable. So it's like, you know, all of a sudden, this sort of old-fashioned idea of an office became so outdated, right? So it's like, it's to me anyways, it was sort of about the casual, you know, now it's about the casualization of the office and bringing in that sort of hospitality idea of it being an experience, right? Of a place that sort of resonates and makes you feel comfortable in a place that you want to be. Seems at sort of the fore, and also being, sorry, maybe hopefully I'm not dominating the conversation here, but you know, sort of bringing your whole self to work, right? So whether you be straight, gay, purple, orange, green, whatever it is, you know, it really doesn't matter, you know. You know, what matters is that you bring your brain to work and that, you know, that you're adding value to the organization. And so how do we design spaces that include everybody, right? It can't just look like one size, you know, used to be sort of a male dominated world, and the spaces actually probably, reflected a male point of view. And I remember, you know, even like, you know, the CEO of America for Accenture was a woman, said to us, like, don't design this for just men. Make sure that you keep women in mind, right? So, you know, and that was what, eight years ago, something like that, you know. So, you know, I think fast forward to today, it's a norm for us to design spaces around inclusion, you know, to have even in diversity and inclusion, you know, consultants on board or whatever to look at our finished palettes to make sure that they work for neurodiversity, and you know, so it's a really, really different world that we're living in that was supercharged by the pandemic.
Wow, a lot there, and some
yeah, sorry, I don't know if I didn't say too
no,
much.
that's great.
Anyway,
really appreciate that kind of overview of the evolution of how we've arrived at today. Be interested, Christine, in, you know, your thoughts around, you know, things that Colin mentioned, anything that kind of sparked off or resonated with you or sparked off some alternative ideas.
I mean, I think Colin was on track with how we got to where we got to. I think if we took a step back and just looked 3-4 years ago, we were in a different place in terms of our workplace. If you looked at a lot of offices, it was very packed in that sense. It was a focus of one-to-one desk. A lot of real estate folks couldn't build space fast enough. We couldn't even find space fast enough. But it was really like a one-to-one ratio. Everybody was jammed in there. It was open seatings, 180 desk. They were just all packed in there. And it was really about maximizing number of people that you can get on a square foot. And then came the pandemic, and it was sort of like, oh, well, this doesn't really work anymore. We don't want people to be sitting that close. And people kind of also verbalized, I don't want to be sitting that close. I don't want to be rubbing elbows with my neighbor. And so I think the pandemic kind of helped push and accelerate the model of neighborhood working and sort of like co-sharing desk and sharing space and things like that. I think a lot of designers, architects are trying to push their end users, their customers, companies, and design to design in that sense, to go in that direction. But I think there was a real resistance about sharing space. It was such a foreign concept. A lot of people had that, well, where do I put all of my stuff, my personal effects and things like that. So there was just a lot of, I don't want to do it, and a lot of pushback on that. The pandemic just sort of forced everybody to accept that that's the way it's going to be. And so that's where we're at now, where people are downsizing on space because there's, hardly anybody coming in, or, a lot of people kind of just passing like one another, people coming into the office, but not there every single day. And so we don't need that kind of density type anymore. So we're reallocating square footage of floor space for what used to be desk for the amenities and things, that go beyond just the stuff that was introduced by Google and Facebook back in the .com days, which was free lunch. That's sort of a standard now in the tech world. Like you have to do more than just give me free lunch and coffee in order for me to be interested in coming into the office, and in order for me to be interested in joining this company. So I think it extends beyond that, and it's really looking at the employee base today, like who's entering the job market, who's going to be the dominating, employees in the next, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and then really kind of building around what's important to them. What do they prioritize? Because that's different than what, people who've been in the job market for 20 years prioritize, which is different from what people who've been in the job market for 40 years prioritize. And so it's really balancing all of the different needs of everybody who's been, through different phases of their career.
That's pretty interesting. And just kind of segueing onto the kind of hospitality influence, I guess, just imagining a kind of hotel environment where they get a whole variety of different guests with different needs, objectives. You might have business travelers versus families versus, something different again. But everyone wants to have a great experience, and somehow the environment and the staff, the people within that hotel need to make sure that they're able to adapt to suit the person in front of them and their needs. Anything you've seen, Christine, in terms of how you can give a great experience to the visitors and the employees ultimately coming to the space?
I think the way that a lot of different companies and design firms have approached it is they take surveys of what it is that people and users, employees, which is ultimately the customer of the business, prioritize. And I've always been one to say, if you're going to ask for someone's opinion, it needs to be sprinkled in there somehow. Otherwise, why ask for it? Because I think that then just leads to people feeling like, well, you asked me like you were going to do something about it, and then you ultimately didn't. So then I think that just kind of has a more negative effect, and it's a bigger uphill battle to climb. But I think, we've moved beyond just lunch and just coffee. And so now it's really, the finishes and making the space feel a certain kind of way. People want to feel in this kind of more relaxed environment. I don't want to walk into a meeting room that's literally just a desk and a table, because that's just very formal. And, there's a group that would rather have, meeting rooms that have soft seating instead. So it's like sofa and TV. So it's a little bit more relaxed atmosphere. So I think there's a little bit of that. There's also, the whole thing that Colin touched on about being diverse and inclusive and things like that, like wellness rooms, not just a mother's room, but an overall wellness room, and different folks with different needs can use it in different ways. And then, really taking into account, like, there's different needs for people now too. Like some people like to work in very bright environments with a lot of light because they need it. And then other people just like to work in a really dark place because they're staring at a computer all day and they get the eye strain and stuff. So it's having that diverse work options for people in the office, and then making it easy for them. The technology behind it has to be able to support those that are in office and those that aren't in office. And when technology doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, it's very frustrating and it's very clunky. But when it works great, it's the best thing ever. So I think it's really looking at your technology and investing some money there, because it's not cheap, into how do I simplify that process and experience for users on both end of it, those in the office and those working remote.
It's a very interesting point around the free lunches as well, and the fact that we're kind of way past them. And you've obviously got these huge companies doing free laundry at lunchtimes, or free bikes around
bike
the campus.
repair, bike repair, sushi, doctors, dentists, you name it. Yeah.
I guess the question comes, or will come, as how far do we go? When is enough is enough? We need to strike that balance of providing the right amenities, the right experiences within the workplace, without going too far and offering too much, I guess. Yeah, Tracy, I wasn't sure if at Nokia you'd found like a good balance with your employees yet about the kind of different things that you're offering.
Yeah, so it's a difficult question, right? Because every site, every country, those needs might be different. But I think what we try to do is not just, a survey of the people, as you mentioned, Christine, because if you do a survey and you don't follow up on what the majority of the people have asked for, then again, it's a failure. So I think what we've tried to do is make sure there's a little bit of something in each of our offices. So we're really looking at where our office is. Are we in a live, work, play kind of environment where we may not have the gym or fitness center inside our space or the cafeteria inside our space, but we have free access to a gym, or very, a discounted rate to a gym. And we have those restaurants right across the street, or, a 7-Eleven kind of convenience store. And we have those places where you can go and walk around a lake, or walk around, a nature trail or something, so that there's all these amenities, but we're not having to pay for them all within our space. And then within our office, I liked what Colin said about bringing our whole self to work, because we know people have different needs, and some need to be in a very quiet environment. So providing those small 1 to 2 person little focus booths or focus rooms that people can use, and they can dim the lights if they need to. And then having those places that have some color and some vibrancy, and digital walls and lots of writable walls and those kinds of spaces as well. And then having, green areas, having wellness rooms. So I think it's really looking at what are the spaces that people are actually using when they're in the office. And that's hard to know, because occupancy sensors don't always tell you that unless, you have the ability to put them everywhere, and that's very expensive. So some of it's observations and really walking around and looking and seeing. And then it's asking, I think, some of our, new talent coming in. One example I have in California is we put in a couple of kind of quiet rooms, kind of like library spaces. You'd have a little library pod, there's books in there, etc. And at first we opened it and we had some people saying, nobody's ever going to use those. Why do we put these in? Recently we had, someone from our new talent group do a YouTube video saying, here's my day in the life of Nokia. And they walked around with their own phone and said, we like to come into the quiet room so we can, get together and, talk quietly or whatever. So it kind of showed that sometimes just because, like you said, you've been in the office 20 years, 40 years, and you may not use that space, but there's other people that do. So let's be sure that we've got some spaces that can attract all different types of people in our workplace.
Absolutely. And just latching on to one of your points, and you mentioned it earlier, Tracy, and just kind of linking it to a question that's come in from one of the attendees around the whole topic of amenities within the workplace. And the question is, how does that, or could that take away from the social sustainability of the surrounding neighborhood? So I'm imagining if you're providing all the food and that kind of thing, the cafes, the coffee shops, they're going to be suffering as a result. How have you kind of managed to blend that element?
Yeah, so I can say for us, we're really trying to use as much in the local neighborhood first. So when we're looking at our office, like in Dallas, for instance, we chose on purpose a development where we knew that we would have access to the gym that was already being provided for a bunch of the residential units there, and that had the restaurants right across the street. Now, they also had some other abilities where they're using, one of the, lots of apps, right? One of them in our area is called Foodsby, where people can order, there's 6 restaurants in the morning. You can order from any one of those 6. They deliver it to you, and the price to deliver it is a lot cheaper than if you had to do DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever on your own. So we're actually trying to do as much of those amenities outside our space and using what's in the environment. But if we happen to be in an area where there is nothing literally within walking distance around us, then it is looking at, do we provide the lunch, or do we have different vendors that maybe come in and do pop-up shops here or there, throughout the season or something. So I think there's some things that we know we'll always provide inside, like a wellness, mother's room. That's something we're always going to do, having different types of quiet and collaboration spaces, game spaces. But if we can get a lot of that in the surrounding neighborhood, we want to work with the local partners and make that happen.
Yeah, I think we're kind of seeing a shift. I mean, Tracy really touched on it because so much of it is locational, right? As an example, in San Francisco, a lot of the, tech companies are located in Silicon Valley on these like large, suburban campuses or whatever. And so there they had to provide the amenities because there was really not a lot around the surrounding community. We moved into sort of central San Francisco, right? Companies like Uber and Twitter were actually incentivized by the government to help regenerate one of the mid-market region, which was a little bit downtrodden, right? And basically they sort of sucked the business life out of the community instead of adding to it because they provided too many amenities. So when Salesforce moved downtown San Francisco, they decided to provide just basic stuff so that, they gave people actually I don't know, there were coupons or something like that to be able to go support the local businesses, right? So, so it does feel like it's sort of moving to a much more rational sort of point that, if you're in a location that has lots of surrounding amenities, with local businesses, then maybe you don't provide them, right? But if you're in a suburban campus, then potentially you do.
I'm guessing that really helps with kind of reducing food waste, that kind of thing. You're not
Exactly.
producing a load of food on campus, which is then maybe not used. Have you seen anything, Christine, from a kind of partnering amenities with partnering with local providers?
No, I mean, I think for how you design the space, I think it'd be smart to just leverage what's around you locally, so you're just not doubling up and basically competing against local businesses. I think a lot of real estate workplace folks and designers are now very cognizant about that and the sustainability of not coming in and sucking the life out of your local neighborhood and putting all of the smaller businesses out because you're offering all like the competing things. But it's really like, what do they offer and what can we do that's different from that? So they're kind of just not directly in competition with each other. So, we're in more of a suburban area, I guess, and we don't have food within walkable distance. Could you walk there? Yes, but it would take you 20 minutes to walk there, then sit and eat, and then walk back. So then you're really thinking like it's going to have to be almost a 2-hour lunch in order to make that feasible. For having lunches in the office and stuff like that we offer, it's not directly competing against any real local eateries because there isn't really any around us. And so we're cognizant about what we do and, the amenities that we put in. And then we have a gym nearby, but the gym is like a high-end gym that's like $150 a month. And so the building that we're in has a gym that is available for tenants to use. And so it's also balancing what does the building amenity offer on top of what does the local neighborhood offer, and then what do you as the company offer. So it's kind of multi-layered and looking at it from all angles, and then really trying not to like be redundant on the offerings that are around you. Otherwise, it doesn't really make the office special in that way, because it's like, well, you offer coffee, but there's a coffee shop right here. And so it's like, what am I going to the office for that I can get at the office that I'm not getting from the local area or something like that? So.
And Alex, you kind of touched, I think, on something really important with regards to the environment, right? Like, pre-pandemic, when maybe it was like one desk, one bud or whatever, like the utilization of a lot of those workspaces were only like, about 40% on average, right? Which is pretty pathetic, right? If you put, so let's say that's 3-4 hours or less, right, of an 8-hour day and a 24-hour day, from a natural resource perspective, that is really pathetic, right? So hopefully, I think we're all still trying to figure out like what is the right size that we can provide. We know that the offices are getting smaller, which, hopefully is a good thing, because then we're hopefully using less, but we have this incredible opportunity, I think, as a community to really figure this out and to do the right thing for the environment, right? Considering we are some of the biggest contributors, or our sector is one of the biggest contributors, or if not the biggest contributor, right, to carbon. We got to kind of crack this. So while it's sort of painful to go through this, I'm sure the developers aren't really happy at the moment. As this sort of gets right-sized and we get smarter about, I think especially like exploiting technology to really figure out what are the right sizes for the offices that we're providing, and not to over provide, and to allow both with hybrid working, the days whether you have sort of maximum capacity versus the lowest capacity, that's not an easy thing to figure out, but it's not one desk, one butt, so to speak, right? So I think, again, we're in this amazing inflection point where it's not only about the blurring of lines between hospitality and work, it's also about really us, as stewards of the environment, kind of taking that responsibility seriously and making it happen. And I think that's sort of what the workforce of today is kind of demanding, because I think, again, the pandemic, I think, gave us a lot of time for reflection, and I think we all appreciate it, especially in London, hearing all the birds and sort of seeing all the wildlife come back, and because there was clean air. I'm sure that was true in cities around the world, right? So yeah, anyway, so I think we've all sort of had this big reflection and reset point to really focus on trying to do the right thing as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Colin. The whole topic of, since the pandemic, I guess, it feels to me as though that the workplace has almost had to earn its right for you to go and visit there. Pre-pandemic, it was like you have to be in the office. It almost, not arrogance the wrong word, but it was almost like you have to come in whether you like it or not. Whereas now it's almost you have to earn the right for people to commute to the office. You have to earn the right for people to make that journey and to make that commitment. Very good. And just on amenities, we've talked a little bit about amenities and food. What are the other amenities that you've seen as really resonating with your people? I know we've seen a big focus around employee wellness. We've seen some clients really looking into things like childcare, pet creches, laundries come up in this conversation. Tracy, what are the amenities that have really kind of resonated with your teams?
Yeah, I know we've been doing some pilots. I know at our headquarters in Finland, they actually did create kind of a little pet area, if you will. So you couldn't bring your pet into the full office place, but if you wanted to bring your pet to work, then you would go to this certain section, and your pet could be with you all day, kind of working there and going into the meeting room and whatever. So I haven't heard how that's going yet, but I know they've tested that out. I mean, obviously, I think food is always, different types of food. So whether it's actually having a third-party coffee vendor, whether it's just bringing in, different chefs at some of our bigger campuses that actually, are out in the suburbs and have a cafe. But I think our newer offices, it's really about, those biophilia and green spaces. So trying to be, have places to go retreat, walk outside, those kinds of things are really important. Inside our office, at least having a little bit of green in the space. Sometimes it's, maintenance costs and such, it gets difficult, but trying somewhere to have those little touches of different textures and different materials and different views and those kinds of things are really important. Technology, as Christine said, I think, that's our number one. Besides spaces being too noisy, technology is the other top complaint, right? If you don't have the right technology to have a hybrid kind of meeting room, so people at home and people in the office can feel comfortable that they're all sharing ideas that you have in a space, I think, that's one of the abilities to come in if you want to be able to sit with some people and then also have others on the screen instead of just everybody being on a screen. I think that's something that we've got to get better at, is really keeping up with that technology in the office place. And I've really seen a resurgence. So when people come in, just having a foosball table or a ping pong table, like, I know it sounds crazy sometimes, and it's gone back and forth on whether they're used or not used. But I've really started to see more people in our office, just if they got 5-10 minutes, just go blow off some steam, play a little game, write, fun things on all the writable walls, welcoming people, saying hi to so-and-so, question of the day, joke of the day, whatever. I think just giving them the ability to go and just write stuff and ask questions and, just kind of be social.
Go ahead, Christine.
I think for us, amenities wise, if you're talking, what we're doing different, the technology was the biggest one for us. It was the biggest push. Understanding that we're always going to have somebody working remote, and whether that person is just too far from an office to make it in, that you had to accommodate for that. So, really improving that technology aspect of it. So we invested heavily into, like Zoom rooms, making it so that the chosen software for all of our video conferencing meetings and stuff like that could easily be integrated into the system and then launched from the system, so that there's not this confusion of, okay, well, whose laptop are we using, and we have to plug in and all these dongles and figuring it out, and then it has to like connect, and is it on the right mic and all of that. So it's really investing in the unit that is in the room itself, acts like its own independent computer. The meeting is there, you push a button, it starts, it turns everything on, turns the lights on, turns the TV on, turns the mics on, turns all of it on, and then it's just ready to go. And investing in the quality microphones too, I think are really important, because depending on the room sizes, you get either a lot of people jammed into a small room, or you get like one person sitting in a gigantic room. And depending on where they're sitting, if they're not like right next to a speaker, sometimes you just can't hear them, and there's like a dead spot. And so we invested, really into like the speakers and the microphones, so that it literally like hunts for who's talking, and it kind of like beams it at that person talking. So then it always sounds like that person is like face into the microphone, so that there's just never, I can't hear you, can you speak louder? And so we've done a lot of testing, and we've asked people on the other end, like, how's the audio quality? And they're always like, oh, it's fantastic. And some of them even say it's so good that, if people are in the back of the room whispering, the microphones will pick it up. So, we always tell people when you're coming into this meeting, like, everybody can hear you literally, because if you're in the back of the room whispering, the microphone is going to find you and just like start, honing in on your conversation. So I think that has been really good. And then having the video conferencing, like the cameras itself, and the new technology that Zoom does now with like its AI and stuff, that's like a whole separate thing that you can buy into, but just getting a decent camera so that it shows people it's clear. And, it moves to the people that are talking. So sometimes, when you're in a big group and you just have somebody talking, you're kind of on the screen, like looking like this, just trying to see like who's actually speaking. And so the camera will find that person, and, you can have multi-cameras in a room where it shows the whole room and then shows the individual speaker. So it just feels like then you're actually part of that meeting, versus you're sort of like in an auditorium and you're just one little face staring at a person on a stage. And so it's the experience that people get that feels different. And then, going the extra yardage of, supplying the equipment at the desk itself. So if you're asking people to come in and plug in and do work, are you giving them, quality equipment to work with? They have their laptops, but we provide them with a large widescreen monitor, and not everybody can do that in their home setup, space constraints, budget, whatever it is. But come into the office and you have access to a widescreen, high def, 4K, whatever monitor that plugs in. Simple, one dongle, plugs it into your computer, charges your computer, but also like loads it up on the screen, so you're not having to carry all these extra pieces just to make it work. So simplifying it for people that they can just literally show up and it works.
And the only thing I might add is that, in Europe, it's really common to provide multi-faith rooms, or prayer rooms, essentially, but, we used to see less of that, probably in the US than here, but that's really, really common. And then mother's rooms are interesting because like, I think they were really common in the US, but I think, we were sort of reminded when I got here that the parental benefits are better in Europe than they are, and especially like if you go to Denmark or other places, like what, a year or two for both of mom and dad is like something, it's it's great. So it's, so there may not be the need for a mothering room, as they call it mothering, we call it here, which was kind of fascinating, just sort of some of the, the cultural just differences depending on the different systems across the world. So it's not all one size fits all, but but we do still see a lot of those amenities being offered.
You can even design a mother's room differently too, to make it a multifaceted use room.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to just look like a mother's pump room, but it could have like, a chair where people can like, sit in, relax. And it's just the way that, you have it flow out into an open area. It's just, there's different ways to make it feel that way. And we did that in the sense of when we were building out our space and we had more of like a wellness area, we encompassed in all gender restroom there as well, just because that's, something that you have to do now and have, on your premise, just because typically most buildings have men and women's restroom, but that's it. And that's what's provided at a base level. And so if you take that extra step to just build in an all gender restroom, that's showing that, you're at least considering the inclusivity of others who may not feel comfortable using the buildings, men and women's restroom, and that's the only choice there. And so I think that takes that, extra thought. And I think employees who use that and need it can really appreciate it when they find that it exists. And that's something that I've been asked, several times in all of our space, that like, do we have this? And when we do have it, it's like they're just like, oh my gosh, like there's actually a place that actually considered it and built it in versus just saying, oh, go to this or go to that. And that's your only two choices.
Yeah, it's interesting here as well because most of all the new buildings, are all gender, all of them. It's not male and female at all. So
Yeah, our codes aren't quite there yet, Colin. We
no,
still
yeah.
but absolutely, all of our offices, we're now going forward, will have all gender restrooms, and we're retrofitting where we can. Like you said, the prayer or meditation rooms, yes, that's always in the wellness rooms. We've also gotten a lot of, asked for bike storage, interior bike storage, right? So it's not just on the street. So making sure we have places that they can bring in their bikes and plug them in and charge them up, and EV charging stations if we have parking lots. All of our sites now, that's for sure. We're increasing that more and more. And then, we have to even think about people who have like motorcycle helmets. We had to make sure that if we provide day lockers that they can fit a motorcycle helmet. So it's, depending on where you are and how people get there, you have to think through all the kinds of things that they may have and need a place to store as well.
Yep, end of journey, right? Because showers, lockers, whole shebang.
Fab. We've had a question come in on the chat that I'm going to throw out to everyone. And this is around the metrics that we're finding that kind of support pre-amenity introductions to post, and if there's any compelling return on investment stats or ways for measuring that you found has worked for yourselves, for clients, to kind of help, I guess, people get round a roadblock that they may be coming up against when they want to introduce an amenity into their workplace. So has anyone got any interesting metrics or return on investment strategies?
Yeah, again, difficult, right? Because the way we may have looked at metrics in the past is not necessarily how we're looking at it now. So, we used to always say, okay, it's going to be so many, 10 square meters a person or 8 square meters a person or whatever it was. But then at sites where you had those amenities and you couldn't ever get to that 8, right? Because you would have 12 or 14, and then everybody would be like, well, your site's too big. And so I think what we've had to do is balance out how many of the desk or the more, one-to-one spaces do we have versus those collaboration spaces. So we're not increasing the overall footprint really at our sites, but if we're now looking at true attendance, how many people are actually coming in on an average daily basis, but also how many are coming in is what we call kind of an average peak basis. So if we look for a whole week, if we know that every Tuesday, we have 50 more people for whatever reason, then, do we have the ability to provide spaces for them? And maybe it's not that we have to have the 50 extra desks, but do we have, some combination of phone rooms and meeting rooms and other casual spaces that people can drop in and out of as needed? Because we know not everybody's sitting at their desk all day. They're in and out of labs, they're in and out of meeting rooms, whatever. So I think we're now really looking at true occupancy of our facility. And then what is that, finding that right percentage, which is the most difficult part of how much collaboration to individual space. So we've flip-flopped from, pre-COVID, maybe only 30% was collaboration and 70%, only 30% was individual, 30% collaboration, 70% individual. Then we flip-flopped that and we were looking at, okay, what if we went 70 collab and 30 individual? But then I think that was too extreme. And I think we're now kind of, is it more 60-40, right? And so it's going to be different at different sites depending on what the people are doing there. If you have a high engineering site and they're really working with labs, you're going to have a lot more kind of hardware and desks because they're not going to be in and out of phone rooms and meeting rooms as much. But if you have a sales office or you have a combination of all different business groups, and I think you have to figure out that balance and really prove the spaces that, people, why they're coming in and what they need to do there, and help come up with kind of that right balance and mix.
I mean, the only other thing I might add, if we all had that metric, that would be amazing. And the ROI, right? It's just, someone said to me the other day, it was something like, everything used to be, cost per square foot or, but is it really, that was the metric, or square foot or square meter, per person or whatever, that's how the real estate group sort of looked at things. But the reality is that, like, how can we measure satisfaction per square foot, right? Or some other means, like, what is the model that we need to shift to sort of in this new reality that we're in? And we're in, I think we're in the midst of it, right? We're sort of in that really, really fascinating spot where we're all still scrambling to kind of sort through it and experimenting, which is great, to see. But yeah, if there was, and probably with AI and the way that we can measure things these days, there probably is a way to really figure out, what is the return on investment for a lot of these types of things. So
maybe
not really an answer, but a sort of answer, right? Yeah.
It's kind of come up already, but maybe one of the metrics is actually, staff retention. We talked a bit about the whole design of workspace around attracting and retaining the best talent. That's what all of this is for, right? This is about kind of creating an environment your best people want to keep coming back to, or maybe the people you want to work, so you want to come and join.
Yeah, I mean, this space has to work so much harder to get people back to the office, right? They're not going to come back to what we provided, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They won't, right? So, yeah.
I think it depends too. I mean, if you're talking just sole amenities, like Tracy was talking about how to use a space and how to be more efficient with the space, but I think it's ultimately, well, what are you trying to solve for? And the real estate facilities team in general, a lot of what we do is back of the house, the stuff that, no one sees. And, people just, it's going well when no one's complaining about it. And when all of a sudden you have complaints and you have issues being raised and tickets being raised, that's when something's wrong. And so a lot of that is on sentiment and, people being happy. And how do you measure that? It really boils down to the qualitative and quantitative, numbers. And there's just no way to measure how, like, are you happy about the space? Are you satisfied? Because I feel like, that is just, today I'm happy and I'm satisfied. Tomorrow something didn't work and I'm not satisfied. So it's very like, it can go either way, and it just depends on how I caught you, depending on how the wind blew. And so there's just no real like meaningful metric that can be put down to say that this works or this doesn't. And I think when you look at it, people are always talking about like, well, usage and optimizing for that. And you can go through all the sensors and do all that stuff. And sometimes that's the struggle of even convincing whoever, that you need to do these things. And how do you prove that there's value behind putting in sensors and putting in all that stuff? Then the honest answer is I don't think you can. You basically just have to say, well, we can always react to whatever it is that you want us to solve for. And we always take that reactionary position, or we can be proactive and put these down, see what it generates, what data it gives us, and then make the decisions based on those data. But otherwise, without the sensors or anything that's collecting the data for us, we're always just going to react to people's complaints, people's tickets, and things like that. So it really just depends, like, where your priorities are. And sometimes, if you're in the reactive state, your priorities are because you don't want to invest the money into something that you don't know that's going to for sure work. And so, but if you're in that place where you like, well, I want to be proactive about things, then it's like, well, that costs us money up front. And if you're willing to put the money up front, then, there's a better way of handling, what's to come versus I'm just going to wait for it to come and then I deal with it when it comes. So I think there's just two school of thoughts on how you want to approach that and how your leadership team wants to approach that and what your overall company's philosophy is on how they approach it. Wait for it to come and then we'll deal with it, or let's get out ahead of it before it becomes too big of a problem that we can't solve it. So I think that's what I've learned, and that's really kind of the best way that I've always phrased it when we were talking about what do we want to roll out. So
yeah, I wonder too, like, is it like if the mantra used to be, back last century, it sounds so funny to say, was form follows function, right? It's like we're definitely, I think we've been in sort of form follows purpose, like answering the why, why are we building these spaces? What is the why behind what we're doing? But it's also now, I think it'd be like form follows experience, right? Form follows environmental responsibility, right? So it's become much more layered than it's ever been in the past. But I think we've all kind of taken that all very seriously and are doing the best we can to move that forward.
Even with optimizing spaces, which we've been doing a lot of since COVID, I'm trying to look at it as, okay, let's put inclusion and diversity first. So if we're taking out space or we're halving our space, what are those elements that really are inclusive to a wide variety of people? So for instance, we're not going to take out the space that has the all gender restroom, right? So if you take that half of the office away, then we're going to build another one, because to me, that's really important. We are not just going to take out the mother's room and the prayer room just because, hey, not a lot of people use them, so let's take them out. I think it's really okay, if that's our philosophy, same with ESG, as you mentioned, Colin. So if ESG is important, biophilia is important, inclusion, diversity is important. Let's make sure that the spaces we are keeping meet those needs. And then I think if you've got the ergonomic, like sit stand desk, that's another thing, super important. Ergonomic chair, super important. So I think it's really finding those elements of the space that make it the most inclusive, that are the, you know, kind of the things to focus on to keep in your workplace, even if you have to reduce.
Yeah, I think to your point, Tracy, it's like, you know, somebody asked the question about the square footage, you know, per person and the metrics that we were using. To Colin's point, I think real estate literally has one metric, which is like dollars per square foot or square foot per person.
Yeah.
There's only like really two metrics that we can go off of. And I think pre-pandemic, I mean, when we were focusing on trying to just pack in as many people as we could, because, you know, space was scarce. That's the problem. You know, when you don't have space, either within the building that you're in because you're in a building, or you don't have it in a surrounding suburban area because you're in some sort of campus park. When space, the physical space itself is constrained, then you're just like really talking square footage per person. And during that time period when we were just pushing the limits of getting people in there, it was tight. And it was like, you know, 120 square foot, you know, per person, sometimes even less than that, depending on the size of your desk, you know. And like, if you had a 6-foot desk, it was probably like 120 square foot a person. If you had like a 5-foot desk where you had the WeWork size desk that were like 4 feet, then it was like really closer to like the 100 square foot per person. But I think since the pandemic and people not wanting to be so close to each other, you know, there's like a need now to get bigger desks, spread them out, rearrange them in certain ways, that I think the square footage and balancing it out with more amenity space, I think where we're seeing it land is somewhere in the 200s per square foot. So for us, it's like maybe a 220 or something like that per square foot is what we're seeing now, that is kind of allocated to a desk, which is basically what a person would use. So I would say it's probably like a 20-ish% increase in giving that much more square footage per person, so that you're not packing them all into like a bullpen, but you're like trying to spread them out, and then also having them utilize some of the amenity space as well, like the soft seatings and stuff that's not technically a workstation, but you could use it to work at. So.
Pretty interesting. I just saw a question in the chat from Valerie around a new trendy benchmark for square foot per person. I actually slightly different, but I actually was watching an interesting discussion where Atlassian was saying the benchmark they were using was the dollars cost per employee visit. So if you look at the total cost of that workspace, all of the amenities, everything per month, and then how many employee visits, like that's the real measure of like how effective is that workplace in attracting, you know, the employees to come to the space. I thought that's quite an interesting one to share.
You'll write that down.
I've heard of that one. I've heard of one, because it's like it's your true overall cost of providing all the amenities for the volume of people coming in. And so if you don't have the volume to support all of these amenities, then that per person cost is significantly higher than if you had it for, you know, 100 or whatever people coming in. So I think that's an interesting one. And then it's, well, how are you accurately measuring people coming in? Then that becomes like that's the next door that opens. You know, it's like, okay, you talk about this as the metric, but then how do you get to that data? Then here's the door of, okay, well, badge readings and swipes are only so much, because you get the people who literally will swipe, come in, and then leave. And does that count as somebody who works in the space? And then or is it time inside of a space? And then how do you measure? So there's just so many ways that like you start here and then it just goes down so many different avenues and lanes. And then it's like, but then you got to get this and then you got to get that and then you got to get that. And it's not just, you start with one thing. It's like, oh, you're going to get here. And then it leads to multiple places. And then it's like, okay, that's just too much money. And so then it's just like, it just always kind of goes down that rabbit hole a little bit. And so is there a short and easy way of doing it right now? No, there isn't, because there's a lot of privacy laws in place too. And so you can't just like, oh, let me just look at the network and see who's connected to. Like, you just can't do that. So then there's things that we have to balance between the cost of software, privacy laws, and what we have currently in our space that could we leverage it in some way. And it's just, they don't always just kind of fold together nicely. It's always kind of, frankly, you have to figure out how to parse the information out. And then when you parse it out, it's open to bias and how you cut the data too. So it's like the data is like, it is what it is based on whoever presents it, and whatever their biases are, they can just always cut data in that way too. So it's an interesting area that I think has come up to the surface a lot more now. that we've learned that there's just no clear, clean way, at least yet.
Good. Well, we're coming down to our final few minutes, and glad to kind of capture any kind of final thoughts or reflections. The one question that's still in my mind is this hospitality workplace thing, is it a fad or is it really a trend? Is there a kind of a longer term evolution and influence that we see coming from this? Or is it just a buzzword that someone, an editor of some design magazine came up with because he was looking for some space to fill? I'd be interested in your thoughts, Colin, around that, and any kind of final thoughts just to wrap up the discussion.
I think corporate design as we know it is dead, right? I mean, it feels like you look at some of these projects, right? And so it's I think the question there is is it an aesthetic thing, or is it a more kind of functional thing, right? Or an experience thing. And I think from an experience and functional perspective, we're not going backwards. I don't think, again, there'll be something else that happens in the world, or, there'll be another seminal change, 8 years, 10 years, who knows how long from now. But yeah, I don't think we're going backwards from an aesthetic standpoint. We've been sort of in this maximalist, era for a while now. And in the era of I think being environmentally responsible, is that still the right thing to do? Not sure, right? So can design can be simple? Can it be responsible? I actually kind of want to write a blog about, we need to bring ugly design kind of to the fore, right? Because if you look at a lot of these materials that are grown, whether it be mushrooms that are grown to things or whatever, they're not the most beautiful things and they don't look perfect, right? And I think, oftentimes we expect perfection, but the reality is I think we have to learn to live with imperfection. So the aesthetics will change, but I think from a functional perspective, I don't think we're going backwards. So, but curious to hear what the others think.
Right, and where can people find that blog when it's published, Colin? I want to follow you up.
I'll post it on LinkedIn for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Good.
I think Colin's answer dovetail into this question that came up about the hospitality approach and how it changes occupancy load of the space. I mean, I think design will always continue to evolve and shift, but when we're talking about space itself and how it's being utilized before, when it's a one-to-one desk, it's seen as a different type of, occupancy load versus when it's hospitality, amenity space, it's like assembly space. And so it depends on, I think, your local government, city, county, state, whatever. It's like there's so many layers to it, and they have their own opinions on how you should be following whatever code requirements. But I think assembly space in most locales' mind is that, people come together and then they leave. So they're not just lingering around versus just regular occupancy load, where it's like these people are just like lingering around at all periods of time. So I think, the more amenity space that you build, I don't know, like offhand, if like, your overall load goes up if you have more assembly space versus like workstation, or if it actually goes down. I'd imagine that, it depends on how you describe your assembly space too. Like if I'm saying my assembly space is really like just for a training room and I'm only having so many trainings, events in a week, then that room is not used all the time. So then I would imagine that your overall load is lower to start with. So it gets tricky, but it just depends on how you're describing the space and what you're using it for.
Yeah, I think it's about experience, right? So it's creating those experiences and being as mindful as we can about the experiences that we're creating can be used in multiple ways. So if you've got that assembly space, it's a training room today, tomorrow it's a social room for whatever, the next day it's a game room. I think if we can combine a lot of these things into these multi-purpose spaces and make it flexible, because the design is going to continue to change. We know our industry never is static. So let's be sure that whatever we're providing is, meeting our inclusive needs and can adapt and change and be flexible.
Brilliant. And thanks, Tracy. Appreciate that. And Christine, for your final thoughts. Tiff, any final thoughts from you as we wrap up?
I mean, I'm still thinking about the pet room at Nokia, if I'm honest. So I'm up for a pet room, to be honest.
You can bring your dog to work at Gensler, at least Gensler London. So yeah.
I'm coming. Don't worry, Colin. I'm coming.
Shameless plug here. Anyway, this has been. I just want to say thank you to Spacer for hosting us. Christine and Tracy, it was an absolute delight to be on this panel with you. I actually learned a lot. I love doing these because I always learn different perspectives. So yeah, but Alex, Tiffany, thank you for hosting us. This is really wonderful.
Great, thank you, Colin, and thanks to all the panelists. Really appreciate your insights and the generosity with your time and your experience. And certainly thanks to our audience as well for joining us. We've had some very thought-provoking questions come through, so really appreciate all your engagement. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.